All right, we want to welcome you to one of the first panels of the conference. There is an incredible group of people around me on the stage, and I am the youngest, the newest, and the most sunburnt of the group, it looks like. I just want to introduce Nivine, who will be kind of moderating as well, be one of the moderators as well, and give everyone a chance to just give a minute introduction just to who you are, why you're on this stage, and what you've been up to lately. So, Nivine, you want to start, ladies first?
Sure. So I'm Nivine Megahed. I'm the president of National Louis University. And yes, I guess Victor and I will be co-moderating today. National Louis University is an institution that's been around for many, many years. It's known for its innovation and for working with a lot of partners to help to advance our service to our students. And so today's panel really helps us to focus on how partnerships will help us to advance innovation in the service of students. Look forward to hearing from all of our panelists, and I'll be chiming in with them.
Hi, I'm John Katzman. I founded and run a studio that's creating a bunch of startups in education called the Noodle companies. Prior to that, I started and ran 2U, and prior to that, I started and ran the Princeton Review. I'm also an investor in probably a couple dozen ed tech startups of one sort or another, and I actually know about half the people in this room because I've been around this for a while.
Hi, I'm Gary Brahm. I'm the Chancellor of Brandman University. If you haven't heard of Brandman, it's because we're fairly new. In 1954, Chapman University started University College, and in 2008, University College became a separate, nonprofit, WASC regionally accredited institution, and with a donation from the Brandman Foundation became Brandman University. So we're just about 8 years old. We were fortunate in separating from Chapman that while still being a part of Chapman, it gave us significant opportunities to partner, and we've done a lot of that, and to be very innovative, and we work very hard on being innovative as well. And so, but as a separate institution, we are the first member of the Chapman University system. We're the only member of the Chapman University.
My name is Victor Saad. I'm the founder of Experience Institute. I totally landed in this space of higher education accidentally. Was curious about forms of higher education, almost got my MBA. Decided to design it through 12 projects in 12 months, and at the end of that crazy year decided to start a year-long program for other people to use experiences as a credible form of learning. So now we run a year-long and 3-month program that is the best parts of study abroad and internships in one place, and are working now with colleges to create kind of plug-and-play co-op programs for colleges and universities throughout the country.
I'm Jonathan Finkelstein, the CEO of Credly, and we're a digital credential service provider, which means we're taking all of the verified claims that people make about their skills and what they can do, and making them much more useful potentially than the ultimate degree that often results from having all of these skills. And one of the reasons I'm especially excited about this panel is building a new currency for recording what you know is not something that any one group or company or university can do on their own. It really takes a lot of players, and so it's all about partnerships and buy-in and mutual success. So we'll talk more about that now, I think.
Indeed. Well, I've heard it said a number of times that relationships are the most powerful engines for change. You see that in kind of small teams. You see that obviously in the family system. You see that in businesses. What does that look like in higher education? And that's what we're going to be talking about today, especially across the board, from public and private partnerships to public-public partnerships and kind of everything in between. So let's start with just that general question of when is a partnership kind of needed? So just curious, when to pursue those partnerships.
All right, I'll take it away. So I think that today everyone would, I think they would concede the point that higher education overall as a business model needs some rehauling. And I think in the past, we've always felt like when you really look at higher education institutions, we were probably in multiple businesses. We were in the housing business, we were in the education business, we were in the administration of financial aid business, we were in the research business, and so on and so forth. And I think that as we look at how quickly the world is changing and the use of technology, we're really coming to recognize that there are some things best kept in-house, some things best kept out-of-house, and some things best done in partnership. And I think that often it's about really a partnership is needed when you start evaluating your business model and you're thinking about what are the best ways for me to achieve the mission of this institution, or for us to achieve that mission, and are they best done with us managing all of it, or would we be better served trying to do it with someone else who's an expert in particular areas? And so that kind of evaluation needs to happen, and I think people are doing it more and more today to figure out how best to achieve their mission.
I'd like to draw a distinction between a vendor and a partner that might be useful to answer that question. There are all sorts of things that somebody can do better, cheaper, faster than you can, and you hire them to do those things. And I don't think that's what we're getting at here. The notion of having a kid together, a marriage is a partnership, and you're not sort of outsourcing the raising of your kid or the having of your kid to somebody else. You're doing it together. So it's actually a really hard question of when do you need to get with somebody to build something together, and when one of those is a for-profit and the other one is a nonprofit, what does that marriage look like? How long term is it? How do you measure each other? How do you know you're doing a good job? I think the move into online for universities was a scary, difficult thing requiring partnerships. And that might not be true forever. It might be that they can do more things, that universities can do more things in-house, can do more things with vendors. But especially at first, where you're just walking into something entirely new, that you're going to have to figure it out as a team.
Right. And that seems overwhelming, right? When you think about just all of what you just said, the number of questions, the number of players, the number of things that have to come together to create a valuable partnership. Is there a decision point, or is there a kind of fork in the road that's clear that you can answer or choose before you go down that route of vendor relationship, partnership?
So Brandman University is early on in competency-based education, and we're the fourth institution in the country approved for direct assessment of financial aid for our competency-based program. But early when we did our work, and we have a very active research department to determine what the best elements of a competency-based program were and what we wanted our learning platform to be able to do, we felt it was really important that there was adaptive learning, really important that there was embedded content so we could follow everything that students did. We felt there were a lot of elements that needed to be in the platform, and we looked around and we didn't find any platforms that did that or were even close. So it became clear that if we needed to work with somebody in developing that, we went through a bidding process and found a company called Flat World to do that. I think it's an exceptional platform, but regardless, the reason we did that, and we've done a number of other partnerships, and I agree, I distinguish partnerships. If you get the standard contract and you're not allowed to change it, it's not a partnership. It's when you work on something and you think you got it right, and a year and a half later you look at it and say, well, the business model is a little bit different and the product doesn't quite do this and we need to tweak that. That's a partnership, and that's when you really have to have a good partner when you're making those changes to what you originally thought, how you originally thought it was going to work. And so I think on the early stages of what we do, a partnership is necessary so that we work together to get it figured out.
So, go ahead.
I was just going to affirm what Gary said and actually provide evidence that what he said is the actual way that Brandman operates, because as an organization that has a partnership with Brandman, one of the first things that Gary and his team said to us when we were sitting at their table was, we want obviously to be successful, but we want you to be successful. We're not going to achieve our goals if
we're relying on you to do things that either you're not comfortable with or you're not equipped to do. So this has to be mutually beneficial. And we crafted the terms of the relationship together. And I think, and it sort of stretched us as a company to think, especially when you're doing something that's innovative, that's new, you shouldn't presume you have the right business model, the exact right approach. You need to make sure that you're figuring that out and to get together with partners. And I think entering into a conversation about partnership that way is a really strong position and actually probably makes for a much stronger relationship than one in which you come in assuming you know exactly how it's supposed to work.
So a couple of things that I'd sort of highlight based a little bit on what Brandman just said. One is I think that when evaluating a partnership or the opportunity for a partnership, that as an institution, you should be very clear about what problem you're trying to solve. And I think that's true for innovation as well, and because I view a lot of these partnerships as very innovative, but they really should be, first, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Is it that you're trying to move into that online space, get into the competency-based area, and you can't find the platforms? Is it that you're trying to build stronger IT infrastructure? So I think that's a key piece in determining what's going to drive that partnership. The second piece I would say is that not only is it what I would say that when you call it a partnership, that it more has to do with the level of at what point are they impacting the student environment and the service that you're trying to provide for your students academically or non-academically. And if they are, you should be thinking of it as a partnership, and it better be mutually beneficial, because if you're not making the decision to impact the experience of that student in a positive way, you're starting to head in the wrong direction for your institution. So I think that's central and critical in any decision around partnerships.
I think companies I've run sort of oscillate between being a vendor and a partner in a really interesting way. And I would argue to the for-profit guys here that at any given moment, you got to look at your incentives
Yes.
and ask, how aligned are you right now with the goals of the school you're working with? Have you created a contract that locks them in, and that's why they're there? Have you, are you just a low-cost provider? What are you doing every day where the two of you are sort of trying to deal with the fact that your incentives are different? And how do you eliminate those places?
So from a high level, these couple of points are really helpful, right? So defining the problem, making sure that your goals are aligned and that the incentives are clear on both parties. Getting down to some of the details, though. I mean, look, I'm relatively new to this space, an entrepreneur here. How in the world do I approach companies, institutions, organizations to start these kind of conversations outside of just coming to GSV once a year?
Which is important.
Well, here we are. So, what's is there a process? Is there a playbook?
Yeah, let me start, and I'm sure John has a lot of ideas on as well. I mean, it's really important to know who you're trying to partner with. And obviously, all higher ed is not the same. Are you partnering with a community college? If you're partnering with a community college, their incentives are very different than a private institution. They're different than a state college or a research institution as well. Oh, how lovely. Excuse me. And so they are very different, and so you need to know what kind of management structure is there? How stable are they? Have they been around a long time? Is the person you make the deal with going to be the one who you're going to actually work with the entire time? The different institutions have different characteristics for longevity of management. What is the faculty governance structure? How is that going to work? Does a faculty really, in public education, in community colleges especially, but in traditional, if there's a strong union environment, whatever, there is a stronger governance structure there as well that may not be pulled in initially, but may come around to get involved with it at some point. So you need to understand how that works. Understand, well, do we want them involved more earlier so we know exactly where we are? Or are we going to try and work it just with the administration? And so you need to learn, do your homework about the institution. I think that is really a key part of it, and then making sure you select the right type of institution to partner with. You need to, as we talked about, values of the folks you're partnering with are very important. And because if you're doing something new, and many of you are entrepreneurs at an early stage, you're not going to get it all right. You're going to have to redo your contract. It's not, and so you want to make sure that you're not going to be partnering with someone who's going to take advantage of the situation on either side, because that is what happens. And so I mean, but looking at value, I mean, it's not, the values is not just do you wear a tie? Because I knew I'd be the only one here wearing a tie, and I know that when you guys come to my place, you're not going to wear a tie. If you go to meet with my creditors along with me, it's 50-50 that you'll wear a tie. And so, but it's more than that. And so you really have to connect with the folks. You have to make sure it's a stable environment, especially if it takes a little bit longer to develop what your project is.
So I have a few entrepreneur friends who every year come and pitch me on their latest idea. And it's sort of part of the fact that I like that, and part of it is that our institution really is a very innovative institution. I don't know that there's that many presidents that sit around and want to be pitched a lot, but I enjoy the process. And so every year they come and they pitch me, and I generally start saying, this is the reason it won't work. This is the reason that you should change it this way. And I generally try to give a good critique around whatever the pitch is. Generally it's a pitch for higher ed. And I think that we need to create more opportunities like that for young entrepreneurs, because I think often they don't get what the end user experience is of what they're creating. And oftentimes these are technology pitches. I know that there are a few institutions that will pilot and test things for entrepreneurs, and I think one of the most important things in trying to have a how-to process is to find those places that will sort of pilot things and go in with the attitude of willingness to change and adapt, because what I've often found is that something comes in the door, but it is not ready for prime time. But it's interesting, and it could be if the person does a lot of changes to the product to adapt to what, and most often the end user is the student. So I'll put my pitch out there that if anybody has an idea like that, we will pilot for them, because we generally will take a class and pilot and give them a discount and then have them judge what's going on with particular applications or different new technologies that are emerging. And there's really a bunch of institutions, I think, across the country that are willing to do that. And hopefully, I think over time, there will be a big enough cadre of institutions doing that the scales will change, and most institutions will be open to trying things like that. But I don't know that there's a simple how to do it. Right. But I would say that I used to work in the business world as well, and they used to always say, go find the TC, the top client. And so in institutions, it's not as simple as that, because it might be the president, it might be the provost, it might be the dean, but you're trying to find the person first who has some, if you can get them invested, they will help you influence the rest of the institution or whoever the group is that you're trying to work with to consider the new product or the partnership or whatever it might be. And then typically it is about really working to make sure you build those relationships even beyond that, more in higher ed than anywhere else. Don't just win over that top person, start winning over the people below, because you need them, because they will sabotage the top person if they don't like the idea.
That is totally right. Quick question for you guys. How many of you are from the for-profit side? And how many from the nonprofit? Okay, so it's about split. Yeah. That's cool. For the for-profit guys, just two quick notes. One, if you're working with a university, generally the best point of entry is a dean. And then you work up to the senior administration, and you work across the faculty and associate deans. And if you're working with a school district, it's probably either a principal or an assistant soup that coming in at the president level is often really hard. It's really hard for exactly the reasons Nivine was saying. And by the way, I pitched her a couple months ago, and so far nothing. So take this with a grain of salt.
By the way, he hasn't delivered what he said he was going to deliver, so it goes two ways.
It's on me.
Katzman and Megahed. Here we go.
Still waiting, John. Still waiting.
I'm so curious. And finally, patience. We have not to return to the baby theme again, but I've never had a relationship with a school district or with a college or university take under 9 months to put together from the time you talk. And it just, you can hope a lot, but that's what it's going to take.
And Vic, you said that you're relatively new to the world of education, and that coming to a conference once a year is not necessarily the only thing you should do to figure out how to best create relationships. But I think it's a good start. I think a lot of people think they have the best new idea. They're in a rush to go share it with someone who could be a potential customer or partner. And not that they have to get so steeped in the potential partner's world that they know every bit of minutia about what they do, but I think it's really useful to speak the language of the potential partner and to go to some unusual conferences or events within the space, and go as a participant. If you're interested in competency-based education, there are competency-based education events, and you can focus on them. You should tap your network and the experts in your life to find out who the people are that you should talk to. I think you should make an effort to show up informed. And I think that's a really good recipe for good, long-lasting relationships. You don't want to squeeze out all of your innovative creativity and your ideas by taking, this is not a rite of passage, you don't have to spend 10 years getting to know the higher ed space, but you should make an effort.
Yeah.
Right, let me just say that 2 years ago I came to this conference, met somebody, or somebody reached out to me, met one of the little rooms, whatever, and we signed the contract probably 3 months ago. So people, I mean, because people come here because they're innovative and they're looking for ideas. It really is important to find people with the right mindset that, when you want to partner with them.
Yeah, and on a personal front, so I also pitched Nivine, and now I'm talking to a dean, and one of the things that's been really helpful talking to you and to Vlad has been the stories of what we've built and tried so far. And I do think that there's something really powerful in being a great storyteller of everything you've done along the way, and documenting, capturing, and being able to package and share that so that people know you're not just coming in with a napkin idea, but something that you've actually put in the market and are able to share feedback on. So from a I think from a partnership standpoint, obviously we're talking about all of the positives, the potentials, how to get there. When do you know a partnership should end or a relationship like this should cease?
Never happened to me.
Like, when's the breakup, John? When's the...
So we've learned along the way what needs to happen to make sure, it's sort of like signing the prenup, that you really do need to make sure, even though you're all going in with the best intent, that you have the appropriate outs for both parties in any kind of partnership. And I think it's often around when people can't deliver in the partnership with the fidelity they initially thought they could, on both sides of that partnership. So we recently had one that was very difficult, and it was around that the quality that was inherent in the relationship wasn't there, and it was an issue for the institution and for the faculty, and even for the students that were engaged in this partnership. We did not do a good job of creating a decent out of it, so we had to sort of finish living it out, mitigating as much of the damage as we could. So to me, it's one is it's got to be mutually beneficial financially and from a mission perspective for a non-for-profit, but it also has to really maintain and hopefully exceed the standards that you want to offer to your students or to the institution for whatever service it's providing.
So So first, I'd argue that long-term contracts are to the benefit of the vendor, almost always. And as an institution, I'd be careful. I'd be careful about them. Number two, really clear measurements. Avoid some of the nastiest breakups. What are we trying to do? How do we know we're doing it well? And just getting back together every 6 months or a year with senior leadership and saying, these were the goals. Here's what we did. These are the goals for next year. And walking away saying, look, there's going to be the usual back and forth between any two organizations, but are we getting it done or not? And what happens if not? Right now, in one of my new ventures, we're working with a lot of universities who have been working with online program managers to build online programs, not surprisingly. And some of them are really, really unhappy. And more than anything, when you pull it out, they feel they're being taken for granted. They thought they were getting into a partnership. In fact, they just have a vendor who is executing poorly but has a long-term contract. One of the weird things about higher ed in particular, a little less true of K-12, but still pretty true, almost nobody sues anybody ever. So universities will never sue to get out of a contract. The vendors will never sue if the university just terminates it. Everybody wants to stay very far away from that whole space, and I think that's pretty healthy. But what it means is you can't have a fist fight, you can't have a lawsuit, you just have a long-term bad marriage.
Right. So we try to have KPIs, key performance indicators, and service levels required in our contracts, and so that's how you have indicators that it's not satisfactory, and then you have outs. But sometimes when you're doing new things, it's really difficult to come up with those key performance indicators that are really valid, and service levels that are meaningful. And so you just have to try and have a reasonable approach to open communication and being able to end the relationship. It's always difficult because there's somebody investing money and somebody saying I need to recover, whatever, and so it's very tricky, and that's how these long-term unpleasant situations evolve. But it's not in anybody's interest to do it. And if you're a service provider, you don't need that reputation. It really damages you far more than than the dollars you're getting out of it. Although you may be desperate for the dollars, and that's why you're doing it. And so it's we try to work it out. But yeah, it's a very difficult thing because typically there's significant investments involved, and it's difficult to come up with those KPIs for something that's really new.
So it sounds like there's this, you can go quickly into a pilot, but going from a pilot or an experiment into a formal contract should take a bit more time, and even that contract, keep it short for the university's sake or the institution's sake, at least to start, even though you've done that pilot, and then kind of phase it into a longer relationship down the road.
Right, but that pilot is expensive a lot of times. I mean, the company's putting a lot of money in at that point, and so that's why it gets tricky. They're not going to say, we'll do this short contract for this pilot a lot of times because they're making a big investment. And some of that's very specific to your institution. So you have to work it. It's very tricky.
You mentioned something earlier about the role that nonprofits play, and I'm curious about foundations investing in for-profits. And is that a good idea, and not? Is that not a good idea, and how to navigate those waters?
I can speak to that with some new firsthand experience. We just at Credly recently completed a round of investment which included partners who are both venture capital partners as well as those who are nonprofits. And on the partnering front, these weren't relationships, first of all, that we entered into lightly or quickly. These were 5 new partners in terms of financing, but groups that we've been working with in some cases for a couple of years to get to know each other, to understand what their goals are, what we're trying to do. And our new financing not only included university ventures and new markets venture partners, but also to nonprofits making their first ever direct investments in a for-profit company, namely the Lumina Foundation and City and Guilds of London, both of which have credentials as a core part of what their mission is all about, but also realize that there are different ways of achieving their charitable ends, including investing in a company. I think the relationship is not only special for us because of the great company that we keep by having these fantastic partners, but it also ensures that our social responsibility is aligned to their charitable purposes. I happen to think that credentials succeed when earners have a lifelong record of their achievements that survive their relationships with any one vendor, school, group where they did their learning. That's something, building a currency like that requires a lot of buy-in, a lot of groups, and as I said in my intro, I think it requires more than a single company, and a nonprofit helps, I think, these nonprofit partnerships in particular help make that case very nicely.
If I may, some of you know this, but I didn't. There is a growing interest in nonprofits, and some of the new ones in particular, of investing in for-profit companies. And I just want to give you the language. A program-related investment is you're so on mission with what they're trying to do, as Credly is with Lumina, that the 5% of their endowment that they're spending every year, they can spend on that investment. Right? So it is as if they're giving you the money, but here they get to get it back. That investment is not about the return. It's not about how great a company you are. It's that their money can best be spent achieving their mission this way. And those happen, but you've got to be really thoughtful about the mission of the nonprofit you're working with, the stated mission and their record of gifts. A mission-related investment, an MRI, is just them investing the corpus of their fund. Generally, they're going to do it in much larger organizations. Generally, there's all sorts of good governance around for nonprofits that pretty much precludes that money from being invested in startups. And so PRIs, just to frame it, is all about your mission, all about you helping them achieve their mission directly.
And so I'd say one of the caveats in that is that if those same foundations are also then pushing those organizations onto, say, higher education institutions, like, hey, we believe in this, you should try this out, a lot of times you have the same issues that you take them on, and if they're not responsive to the end user and willing to adapt that platform to the end user, then you end up having all these sort of glitches, and it's not as effective as you want it to be. And if you go back and think, were they good? Were they better off investing in this organization, or should they have let the field stay open and let higher ed institutions work with any of these organizations that do this to find the one that best works with their students? So it's about, again, staying focused on what that student or end user experience is going to be.
Yeah, these foundations know a lot about what is going on in the higher ed space, and so an investment in Credly, for instance, is something that I think they know so much about that it is, and with their appropriate due diligence is, I think, an appropriate thing for them to do. Actually, Brandman will invest in some of the ventures that we work with as well. We think the most important alignment of interests is inequity. I think you all in the for-profit world have figured that out a while ago. And whether it be investment, whether it be warrants, whether it be certain rights, we think, I mean, I have a lot of you folks calling me all the time to get opinions on various things. Well, because we know a lot about what's going on, that's what we do, is we try and stay on top of what's going on. And we think it could be a wise thing for us to do. We think being a strategic investor is something that a lot of folks do and think is important as well. And when we work at the early stages with developing something new, we're putting a lot of brain power into it. We're putting a lot of effort into it. Typically as much as our partners are. And it's appropriate that that our interests be aligned in that way. So we think that's not necessarily without controversy, but we think that's an important vote of confidence, as well as we think it's an important strategic objective of ours, and no better way to use our endowment.
I'm curious, we've talked a lot about the people who are navigating these partnerships. How do you listen to the student, the end user, and make sure that the student or students have a say?
So we've gotten a lot more disciplined about that, particularly in some of our newer innovative ventures, and literally debrief with students quarterly to ask them about how the technology is working for them, what the experience is like for them, what would they like to see differently, and really evaluate all those opinions to determine what adjustments we need to make to better serve those students. Like I said earlier, we also will do that when we test something out for someone, also use those students as also a sort of a sounding board for us to both give feedback and to think about whether something has more broader utilization impact for us. So that's what we do.
Yeah, and we do student satisfaction surveys, and we poll our students a million different ways to try and get good longitudinal data. We think that's really important, and and like when we launched our CBE program, the first 2 groups of students in the program were betas. They agreed to be in focus groups and respond to surveys, so we could learn what was going on and everything else. WASC commended us for being totally student-centered, so we think what the student wants is the most important thing. But when it comes time to doing these deals, we're the ones who are the education experts, and while we want to know how it's working for our students, we don't get involved with our students as we're talking about deals and figuring out what to do and negotiating things. We will evaluate the impact on our students, but we think we have a good idea of what's best for our students, and that's what management's supposed to do.
Do you have any sort of student kind of committees or classrooms or anything that is an ongoing poll, or is it just kind of blanket across the campus per partnership? And this goes, I guess, to anyone, but
for us, it's really about who's utilizing sort of the new technology that we're trying to evaluate. So it's not a standing group. It's the group that's being impacted when we're trying something out.
Right, and we will survey everybody, and then we'll segment. But as I said, for a specific initiative, we're going to want to do focus groups and specific surveys, meet with the students, and hear from them exactly how it's going.
I think sometimes the partner who's partnering with the higher ed institution is pleased to know that the sale or the partnership's going through, but hasn't necessarily taken the time to understand how the university is going to measure that students are being successful. You sort of just sort of make some assumptions about that, but assumptions aren't really the best way to go. I think the partner, the technology provider, should really get to know how the institution is going to measure whether what you're doing together is successful, and you should be checking in along the way in that partnership to make sure that's happening. That avoids the earlier question about partnerships, and it can help avoid that earlier question about partnerships not working out.
Sure.
In the broad categories that you might think about in higher ed, there is recruiting of one sort or another, and the only metric that matters is what's my cost of acquisition? How much does it cost to bring a student in when I work with you? There's the other end of the spectrum is, are you involved in helping me retain students? In which case, what's the dollar cost of one additional grad? Right? If you think about how do you crunch it all into one place, it's what's the intervention, and what did it end up costing, and what's the impact versus a control group? And I'm looking at a lot, as an investor, I look at a lot of programs much earlier on, as well as helping schools. And it really is a little bit all over the place. It might cost $25,000 to create one additional college grad, and with a middle school intervention or with a college intervention. Is that a good number or a bad number? I don't know, but it's better than 35. And so, as we start trying to resolve things with simple metrics and with things that can be looked at in a variety of ways, in a variety of programs, will start having a feeling for what is good and bad. And then for the students ongoing, the question is, what's their overall satisfaction and happiness, both the students and the faculty? And that's an easy one to measure. And what's their level of engagement? A little harder to measure, but easier online. And then finally is just what kind of jobs do people get when they graduate. But it's not having lots of metrics. It's having a couple that tie directly to the mission of the institution. And that if you're not solving one of those things, what are you doing?
But by the way, I had an unexpected experience directly with one of our partner students a few weeks ago. I was invited to attend a professional development night where honor students at Illinois State University were preparing for the job market, and they asked me to come in and be like a keynote speaker. And it was a little bit difficult to get to Normal, Illinois. I had to figure that part out. But when I got there, it was one of these things. I got so much more out of the experience than I'm sure that they did. The ability to see how people are using your platform or your product, people that you have no direct relationship with, that don't necessarily owe you anything.
I was sitting there in a room
where
a bunch of these honor students were being coached on how to prepare their Google
searches on their own name for the job market. And here was a room of like 50 students, and the first hit on their Google search results was their Credly profile. They didn't even have LinkedIn profiles yet. And it was a reminder that, hey, we're actually having more of an impact than I might have actually recognized had I not been in that room. That's like an eye-opening experience for someone developing a platform and building a company. And yet, I could have easily not gone to Normal, Illinois. So don't turn down invitations to visit your customers.
Yeah, I think any opportunity you have to listen to the end user, take it, and be really intentional about setting up those opportunities if they're not coming your way. Hey, we have about 15 minutes left, and I just want to open the floor to ask questions to the panelists here today. And so these last minutes are yours. Any questions from what you've heard, what we've discussed so far? Go for it. What's your name?
My name's David Mulligan. I'm with Eduvantis, and want to sort of feedback some of the comments I've heard, because I think one of the things that we've found in working with higher education is they're under tremendous pressure, and the context of the partnership really matters. If one of the partners going in and they're in the sweet spot and they're growing, and the institution is under siege, that doesn't make for a very good partnership. And I've heard sort of two things. I've heard you got to keep it short, and to me, by definition, partnership sort of implies strategic. There's very little things that are going to get done in higher ed that are worthwhile that are going to happen in the first year. You certainly need benchmarks, and I'm curious if you can comment about that, as well as we've talked a lot about students, but most partnerships I find are undone by faculty. And it tends to be a small percentage of the, and every institution has at least a 10 to 20% faculty that from the get-go, their goal is to sort of undermine it. And so I'd be curious to sort of talk about context and the faculty role.
Before we do, just a question back. What do you consider the sweet spot in terms of a length of contract that you can affect strategic change, but where you're not locked in to a relationship with the university might end up regretting it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we encounter a lot of contracts where the universities say we can get out at any point in time, right? We say that's not a partnership. We don't go for that. I think a year is a minimum period.
Sure.
With the intent of sort of having a 2 to 3 year kind of relationship. But certainly there's got to be metrics. But I think universities, mostly nonprofits, tend to be notoriously risk averse. And so at the earliest sign of any kind of white knuckle period, that's when things that's when the rubber meets the road in partnerships. And I think it's kind of a conditioning, as we're talking about, what makes a good partnership, and it's not sort of in the dating process, in your marriage,
I'm totally with you. I think 3 years is about right. Could be a little longer. I think past that, it's probably, again, to the vendor advantage. Deans are appointed for 5 years at a lot of schools. So I could love you, and I really want you to be here. But then you're going back to faculty unless I reappoint you. It's not forever.
So, so I think that the issue is about building the appropriate outs, and it could be a longer term relationship, but you want to have points where you can sit down and say, do we both still feel good, or do we need to either renegotiate this or get out of it? And I think in some cases there are certain areas, and some of them are like in OPMs, which is what John's familiar with, where people ask for a 10-year contract, don't want to step off of that 10-year commitment, which is a long commitment for an institution, in a revenue share modality. And if it's not clear if there are ways to get out, at some point it may feel very disadvantageous to the institution, depending on what you set up. So I think that the idea of just always thinking that if at some point it no longer feels like a win-win, there's going to be a lot of dystopia that emerges in that relationship. And I don't think anyone's saying it has to be 1 year or 2 years or 3 or 5. I think it's really just about how often you can sit down and work it out. I mean, to go along with the marriage analogy, I had some friends who every year at their anniversary not only celebrated but recommitted to each other for another year. And I don't know whether you do that every year or every 3 years, but it seems like there should be the opportunity to say, here's what's going well, here's what we need to rework a bit or adjust a bit, and now let's keep going, as opposed to saying it should only be this long.
Are they still together?
No.
No.
But it was 25 years of being together, so.
That's a good contract. Any other questions? We'll go right here and then back.
My name is Steve Feldman. I'm just curious about any tools or resources you guys could recommend that you've used in the past. And there's no question that for helping partnerships exist, we want to have partners that have values that are in line with yours. But how do you go about it to talk to a bunch of people, being efficient and trying to learn more about an organization, make sure the interests are in line, ask those important questions while being efficient and able to focus on maybe multiple opportunities at the same time?
I think you want to vet not only the company but the people in it, and especially startups. You know, there might be some really promising things that are just new, but who are the top 5 people? What have they done before? And who's vouching for them? And just the way you'd interview, the references. What are they called? Second party references. Second jump. Right, you ask the references for who are other people who I should call, and those are the people who are really interesting. I would do that here on the leadership team.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's easier to check out an institution. You know, you can go. I mean, you know, we're WASC accredited. You can see our self-study. You can see other things. Go to the website. You can learn a lot about us. You can check us all out. Obviously, you have to spend a lot of time with each other. And as I said, you know, stability of management is really important because that tells you if the people you make the deal with are the ones you're going to implement the deal with. But on the school side, it's really important to check out these early stage companies that you're dealing with. You want to know the management. You want to know the team. You want to know their pedigree. You got to spend a lot of time with them. You'll learn a lot about them during contract negotiations. You want to learn who's backing them. You want to speak to who's backing them, find out who the firms are they higher ed, investors or not, or I mean, so because obviously a lot of these companies are really fragile, and their success is based upon potentially earning money from what their relationship with the institution, and so it's really important for the institutions to spend a lot of time learning more about the company. But the only way you learn about each other really is to spend a lot of time with each other.
And from the...
I was just going to say, something that I really appreciated on my end is just a group of people that have been kind enough to step in on a kind of time-bound, project-based kind of board of advisors that can just introduce me to the right people. I get through a lot of the shaft really fast, and I'm really grateful for those individuals who've stepped in that way. It saves a lot of time to get connected to the right person because they know, they see the alignment for me.
And from the higher ed perspective, I'd add further that I think one of the things you want to make sure you think about is what happens if the company is sold, goes public, and building in some potential outs for you to reevaluate the relationship if it changes hands, in addition to the stability of the top leadership, some outs if that changes, to evaluate again depending on who takes over. Because oftentimes, you know, if you're in an equity situation, you're investing once it gets to a certain point, you're selling it, and whoever comes in may not be the people you want to work with at the university. So you want to make sure those things are considered in any agreement and thought through in advance when you're working together.
And very tough thing for a company to give.
Right, I know, because they want to sell the value they have.
Right.
One of the things that I think is important, it goes both ways. When we began working with Brandman University, it was very clear to us that this was not a traditional university partner. This was a group that was used to being innovative, that had been through partnership development and discussions before, that was nimble and able to adjust and adapt. I think it's important to know about the history of the university or the leadership, and how they typically have structured what might be considered an innovative relationship. And one way of doing that is just simply to say, based on what we're talking about right now, is there any precedent for this? Have you done a relationship like this with anybody else? Sometimes it's just as simple as asking. And if not, the idea of it being new could also be a driving factor for doing it, even if it's the first time. But it's good to know that.
Right. When we established a relationship with Credly, Jonathan and his team, we didn't know that they were going to, raise money, but we thought they were great folks, and we really embraced what they did. And then they raised money from Lumina. So we thought that was absolutely fabulous, and some other folks that we know as well. We thought that was absolutely fabulous, and if you pick the right partners, then a lot of the right stuff happens.
Maybe the last question right back there.
It sounds like you alluded to sometimes institutional partners, especially one-on-one, can be a little bit transactional, right? But what we found is that when you bring, thanks. I think you were alluding to that institutional partners can be a little bit transactional when they're one-on-one. I think what we found is that if each of those people brings somebody else to the table, can start to be transformational, but there's not really a roadmap for how to build these mini coalitions. It's a little messy. It can be hard to bring folks to the table, but the ROI can be huge. I'm really interested in if you found great processes for this, or sort of your to-do, what not to-do list when bringing not huge coalitions, but smaller coalitions, a nonprofit, a corporation, and a higher ed institution together at the table. I think that can be really magical, but it's also really hard, and I'd love your advice.
It can be magical, and magic isn't real. It is really hard to put together coalitions, and they're endothermic. You just have to keep putting energy in, and then if you don't, they disappear. I like the model better of creating relationships that are one-to-many, and then convening people, bring them together to a conference, bring them together to small dinners and so forth, and looking for little areas of shared interest. I think it's really hard to put together something sort of from scratch.
So let me give a counterpoint to the dream dasher over here. We recently, one of the pitches I got, actually the reason I loved it was because it did seem a little magical. And this new platform that's being developed brings together employers, a number of nonprofit institutions who are committed to serving sort of first-gen underserved students, and the platform itself, and what it does, it de-risks the experience for employers because it has created opportunities for students to get small projects to work with big employers, and the universities then work with the students to help them to gain the kind of confidence and skill set. What's happening is that the employers are getting excited and starting to coach the students are getting excited because they're getting exposed to new things, the faculty are excited because they're seeing these students really transform in their confidence and their ability to work in broader organizations, and we're hoping in the end we're going to see much better employment opportunities emerge by virtue of that. So that's one example of where everybody felt like they were doing something good and getting something out of it. So the employers sort of felt like they could bring on many students at a low cost and see who they thought had talent. They also felt like they were doing good by serving students who were very underserved. So I think that depending on how you structure it, you can structure in a way where everybody is winning, and then they're excited about it, and then you see all kinds of synergies start to emerge from that.
Well, it's 11 o'clock, so we're going to wrap up. But thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.